Hi, and welcome to the Archive of History. Tonight we are going to step through time itself and walk the streets of a city that stood for over 1,000 years as the crown jewel of the civilized world. A city of golden domes and marble columns, of incense and holy chants, of silk merchants and emperors' guards. This is the story of Constantinople, the city at the crossroads of continents, the bridge between ancient Rome and the medieval world, the place where East truly met West. We will explore what it meant to live and breathe in this impossible metropolis, to walk beneath its mighty walls, to hear the roar of its chariot races, and to witness the slow turning of its days through seasons of glory and seasons of siege. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from, and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. Now settle into comfort. Let the distractions of the modern world fade into silence. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow yourself to be carried back across the centuries. Imagine the scent of distant spices, the echo of church bells across water, and the soft lapping of waves against ancient stone. The city waits for you, just beyond the veil of sleep. Let us begin our journey to Constantinople. It is early morning, and you are standing on the deck of a merchant vessel making its way through the narrow strait of the Bosphorus. The air is cool and carries the mingled scent of salt, fish, and something else, something sweeter, like distant incense mixed with the aroma of baking bread. The water beneath you is a deep, almost metallic blue, and it moves with a gentle current that seems to guide your ship forward as if the sea itself knows where you are meant to go. Ahead, barely visible through the morning mist, you can see the outline of land. Not just any land, but the peninsula where Constantinople rises like a vision from a dream. As the mist begins to thin, the first thing that strikes you is the sheer scale of what lies ahead. The city is enormous, far larger than anything you have ever seen. It sprawls across hills and valleys, reaching toward the sky with hundreds of domes and towers, their surfaces catching the early light and glowing like embers. The most prominent of these is a single massive dome that seems to float above the rest, the great Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, its golden cross gleaming even from this distance. You feel a tightness in your chest, a mixture of awe and anticipation. This is no ordinary city. This is the New Rome, the heart of the Christian world, the seat of emperors who trace their lineage back to Augustus and Constantine himself. Your ship moves closer, and now you can see the walls. The famous walls of Constantinople rise from the water's edge in a series of massive stone fortifications, layered one behind the other like the rings of an ancient tree. There are three distinct lines of defense: the outer wall, the inner wall, and the sea walls that run along the coastline. Each is thick, crenellated, and dotted with towers that stand like silent sentinels. These walls have held back Persians, Avars, Arabs, and countless others. They are not just stone and mortar. They are the physical manifestation of the city's defiance, its refusal to be conquered. Between the walls, you can see the moat, now partially dry in this season, its bottom overgrown with scrub and weeds. The moat is wide and deep, a final barrier for any army foolish enough to attempt an assault. As you pass through the entrance to the Golden Horn, the great natural harbor that forms the northern boundary of the city, the noise begins. It is a low, constant hum, the sound of thousands of voices, the clatter of carts on cobblestones, the cries of seabirds, the rhythmic hammering from shipyards and workshops. The Golden Horn itself is crowded with vessels of every kind. There are sleek merchant galleys with their laden sails furled, heavy cargo ships from the Black Sea loaded with grain, fishing boats with nets still dripping, and elegant imperial dromons, the warships of the Byzantine navy, painted in bright colors and bristling with oars. The water here is calmer, almost oily in its smoothness, reflecting the sky and the buildings that line the shore. Your ship glides toward one of the many wharves that jut out into the harbor. Dockworkers, stripped to the waist despite the cool air, are already moving toward your vessel, calling out in Greek, some in Latin, others in languages you do not recognize. The smell grows stronger now: tar and rope, wet wood, the sharp tang of vinegar used to clean the decks, and beneath it all, the faint but persistent odor of sewage and fish. It is not unpleasant, merely the smell of a city that lives and breathes and works without pause. You step onto the wooden planks of the wharf, feeling the solidity of land beneath your feet for the first time in days. The wood is worn smooth by countless footsteps, and it creaks softly under your weight. Before you stretches the city proper. The buildings are packed tightly together, rising 2, 3, sometimes 4 stories high. Their walls are plastered in white or pale ochre, and many are decorated with frescoes or mosaics that catch the light. Red-tiled roofs slope at gentle angles, and from nearly every rooftop you can see the cross, small iron crosses, large gilded crosses, crosses carved into stone. This is a city that wears its faith openly. Narrow streets wind away from the harbor, disappearing into shadow and sunlight, lined with shops and homes and the occasional grand building with marble columns and bronze doors. You can hear music, the high, clear notes of a flute mixing with the deeper tones of a lyre. Somewhere, a child is laughing. Somewhere else, a woman is singing. You take a breath and step forward, leaving the ship behind. Your legs feel unsteady after so many days at sea, and you pause for a moment to adjust to the solid ground. Around you, the wharf is a scene of controlled chaos. Sailors are coiling ropes, their hands moving with practiced efficiency. A customs official approaches, a thin man in a plain tunic, carrying a wooden tablet covered in wax. He asks your business in Greek, his tone bored and bureaucratic. You respond as best you can, and he makes a mark on his tablet and waves you through. Behind him, you see a line of merchants waiting to have their goods inspected, their faces showing varying degrees of patience and frustration. You move away from the waterfront, following the flow of people into the city proper. The transition from harbor to street is gradual. First, there are warehouses. Their doors open to reveal stacks of amphorae, bales of cloth, barrels of wine. Men are moving goods in and out, using handcarts or simply carrying loads on their backs. The smell of tar and rope gives way to other scents: bread baking, fish frying, the sharp tang of vinegar and pickled vegetables from a nearby shop. You pass a group of beggars sitting against a wall, their hands outstretched, their voices raised in a ritualized plea for alms. Some are missing limbs, others are blind, their eyes clouded with cataracts. You reach into your purse and drop a small copper coin into the bowl of an old woman, and she mutters a blessing, her voice cracked and weary. The streets are narrow here, barely wide enough for a cart to pass. The buildings lean in, their upper stories almost touching across the gap, creating a tunnel of shadow. Laundry hangs from windows, flapping gently in the breeze. You see faces looking down at you from those windows. Children, women, the occasional man. They watch the street with the idle curiosity of people who have nothing better to do. The cobblestones beneath your feet are uneven, worn smooth in some places, cracked and broken in others. Water runs in a shallow channel down the center of the street, carrying away refuse and waste. The smell is not pleasant, but it is a smell you will become accustomed to, the smell of a city that houses hundreds of thousands of people within its walls. You emerge into a small square, a place where several streets converge. In the center stands a fountain, and the sight of it fills you with relief. The fountain is simple, a stone basin fed by a lead pipe that emerges from the wall. The water flows continuously, clear and cold, and you join the small crowd gathered around it. People are filling jars and amphorae, washing their hands and faces, drinking directly from cupped hands. You do the same, splashing the water on your face, feeling the dust and salt of the journey wash away. The water tastes clean, faintly mineral, and you drink deeply, grateful for the city's infrastructure, for the aqueducts that bring this life-giving resource from distant springs. The square is also a gathering place. Old men sit on benches beneath a plane tree, talking in low voices, their hands gesturing to emphasize their points. A street preacher has taken up a position near the fountain, and he is speaking about sin and redemption, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. Most people ignore him, but a few have stopped to listen, their faces serious. Near the preacher, a group of children are playing a game with small stones, laughing and shouting. A woman is selling dried figs from a basket, and the sweet smell draws you closer. You buy a handful, and they are sticky and delicious, bursting with concentrated sweetness on your tongue. You linger in the square for a while, watching the life of the city unfold around you. You see a priest in black robes walking past, his head bowed, his lips moving in silent prayer. You see a soldier, a member of the city guard, his armor dull but serviceable, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. You see a woman in a fine silk robe, her face veiled, walking quickly with a servant trailing behind her carrying a basket. The diversity of the city is overwhelming. People of every station, every occupation, every background, all moving through the same streets, all part of the same vast organism that is Constantinople. As you stand there, you realize that you are no longer a visitor, no longer an outsider looking in. You have become part of the city, one more thread in the intricate tapestry of its daily life. The streets of Constantinople are waiting, and you are about to discover what it truly means to live in the greatest city on earth. The main street of Constantinople is called the Mise, which simply means the middle. It is the central artery of the city, running from the Great Augustin Square near the Imperial Palace all the way to the Forum of Constantine and beyond, eventually splitting into branches that lead to the city's various gates. As you enter the Mise from a side street near the harbor, you are immediately swept into a river of humanity. The street is wide enough for two carts to pass each other with room to spare, and it is paved with large, carefully fitted stones that have been worn smooth by centuries of traffic. A covered colonnade runs along each side, providing shade and shelter from rain. The columns are marble, some fluted in the classical style, others plain, and they support a roof of red tiles that keeps the walkway cool even on the hottest days. The Mise is never quiet. It is a place of constant motion, constant sound, constant life. Merchants have set up stalls beneath the colonnade, their goods spread out on wooden tables or hung from hooks on the columns. You see bolts of silk in colors you have never imagined: deep crimson, brilliant azure, shimmering gold. There are spices piled in small pyramids, cinnamon sticks, whole nutmegs, dried cloves that fill the air with their sharp, sweet scent. A baker is selling fresh loaves of bread, round and golden, still warm from the oven. Next to him, a woman is offering honey cakes drizzled with syrup, and the smell is almost unbearably tempting. You see vegetables, onions, leeks, carrots, and live chickens in wicker cages, clucking softly. There are pottery shops displaying amphorae and bowls, leatherworkers stitching sandals and belts, and a blacksmith whose forge sends up sparks and the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil. The people are as varied as the goods. Most are dressed in simple tunics, men in knee-length garments belted at the waist, women in longer versions that reach to their ankles. The fabric is wool, mostly dyed in muted tones of brown, gray, or undyed natural white. But here and there you see flashes of color and wealth. A man passes wearing a tunic of fine linen, dyed a deep purple with a silk cloak draped over his shoulders. Purple is the color of the imperial family, and anyone wearing it, unless they are of very high rank, is flaunting their status dangerously. You see a woman in a long flowing robe of green silk, her head covered by a veil embroidered with gold thread. She walks with two attendants, servants who clear a path through the crowd. Jewelry glints at her neck and wrists, gold, pearls, possibly sapphires. But most of the people here are ordinary, laborers with calloused hands and sun-darkened skin, shopkeepers calling out their wares in loud, practiced voices, a group of monks in black robes, their heads bowed, walking in single file toward one of the city's many churches. A young boy, barefoot and dirty, darting between the stalls, probably looking for something to steal or beg. The air is filled with voices speaking Greek, the common language of the city, but you also hear Latin, Armenian, Arabic, and languages you cannot identify. Constantinople is a crossroads, and people from every corner of the known world pass through its streets. You notice the light. The sun is higher now, and it slants down between the buildings, creating sharp contrasts of brightness and shadow. The white plaster walls reflect the light, making everything seem to glow. The smell of incense drifts from a nearby church, frankincense, heavy and resinous, mingling with the scent of beeswax candles. You hear the sound of chanting, a deep rhythmic cadence that rises and falls. It is a reminder that Constantinople is not just a city of commerce and politics. It is a city of prayer, of devotion, of a faith that permeates every aspect of life. As you walk, you become aware of the city's topography. Constantinople is built on 7 hills, mimicking Rome, and the streets rise and fall accordingly. The Mise itself is relatively level, but the side streets climb steeply, their steps worn and uneven. From the higher vantage points, you can catch glimpses of the sea, the blue expanse of the Marmara to the south, the glittering ribbon of the Bosphorus to the east. The city is surrounded by water on 3 sides, which has always been both its protection and its lifeline. You pass through the Forum of Constantine, a vast open square dominated by a towering column. The column is made of porphyry, a rare purple stone quarried in Egypt, and it rises over 100 feet into the air. At its top stands a statue, or rather the fragments of one, for the original has been damaged by earthquakes and replaced several times. The forum is crowded. People are gathered in small groups, talking, arguing, conducting business. A public crier is reading from a scroll, announcing some imperial decree in a loud, clear voice. A few people stop to listen, but most ignore him, too caught up in their own affairs. The forum is also a place of punishment. At one end you see a wooden platform where criminals are displayed in stocks, their crimes written on placards hung around their necks. A small crowd has gathered to jeer and throw rotten fruit. The maze continues, and you follow it, drawn deeper into the city. You pass churches, small ones tucked between buildings, their interiors dark and cool, lit only by oil lamps and candles. You pass bathhouses, their steam visible through open doors, and you hear the sound of splashing water and laughter. Public baths are an important part of life here, a legacy from Rome, though they are also places of socializing and gossip. You pass a library, its entrance guarded by a scholar in a plain robe, and through the door you glimpse rows of scrolls and codices on wooden shelves. The bathhouses deserve a closer look, for they are one of the city's great pleasures and one of its most important social institutions. You decide to enter one, paying a small fee to the attendant at the door. Inside, the air is thick with steam, and the sound of voices echoes off the tiled walls. You undress in the apoditorium, the changing room, leaving your clothes in a niche watched over by a slave who will guard them for a few coins. Then you move through a series of rooms, each hotter than the last. The tepidarium is warm, its pool filled with water heated by underground furnaces. You lower yourself into the water, feeling your muscles relax, the tension of travel melting away. Around you, men are talking, conducting business, sharing news. The bathhouse is a place where social distinctions blur slightly. Though the wealthy have their own private facilities, many choose to come here, to be seen, to network, to participate in the life of the city. From the tepidarium, you move to the caldarium, the hot room. Here, the heat is intense, almost unbearable. Sweat pours from your skin, and you feel lightheaded. A bathhouse slave approaches, offering his services, and you nod. He uses a strigil, a curved bronze scraper, to remove the sweat and oil and dirt from your skin. The scraping is vigorous, almost painful, but when it is done, you feel cleaner than you have in weeks. You plunge into the frigidarium, the cold pool, and the shock of the icy water takes your breath away. But it is invigorating, and you emerge feeling reborn, ready to face the city anew. As you dress and prepare to leave, you notice a group of men huddled in a corner, speaking in low voices. Their conversation is intense, and you catch fragments of it, something about politics, about a dispute in the palace, about factions and alliances. The bathhouse is not just a place for washing, it is a place for intrigue, for the exchange of information, for the making and breaking of deals. You file this knowledge away, understanding that in Constantinople everything is interconnected, that every institution serves multiple purposes, that the line between public and private, between leisure and business, is always blurred. Back on the Mise, you continue your exploration. You pass a barber's shop, where men sit in chairs while barbers trim their beards and hair with sharp scissors and razors. You pass a cobbler's stall, the smell of leather strong, and you see the cobbler stitching a sandal, his needle moving with quick, precise strokes. You pass a wine shop, its amphorae arranged in rows, and the proprietor calls out to you, offering a taste. You accept, and the wine is thick and sweet, honeyed and strong, and it warms your throat as you swallow. You notice the city's systems of control more clearly now. There are inspectors everywhere, men in official tunics who move through the markets with tablets and scales, checking weights and measures, sampling goods to ensure they have not been adulterated. You see one inspector argue with a baker, accusing him of using too much chaff in his flour. The baker protests, but the inspector is firm, and he imposes a fine on the spot, recording it in his tablet. The baker pays, his face sullen, and the inspector moves on. This is how the city maintains its standards, through constant vigilance, through a bureaucracy that is both efficient and sometimes oppressive. You also see the city's religious life more clearly. Small shrines are everywhere, tucked into niches in walls, standing at street corners. They hold icons, often just painted boards, depicting saints or the Virgin Mary. People stop as they pass, crossing themselves, murmuring a prayer, sometimes leaving a small offering, a flower, a coin, a bit of bread. Faith is not something reserved for churches and feast days. It is woven into the fabric of everyday life, a constant presence, a source of comfort and hope. As the afternoon wears on, the character of the Mies changes. You reach the wealthier districts, and the shops become more refined. Here you see goldsmiths displaying their wares, rings and bracelets and necklaces, worked in intricate filigree, set with gems that catch the light. You see perfumers offering scents distilled from roses and jasmine and musk. You see booksellers with manuscripts beautifully illuminated, their pages covered in gold leaf and rich pigments. The customers here are different too. Men and women in fine clothes, attended by servants, moving with the easy confidence of wealth and status. Everywhere there is the sense of order, of systems that have been refined over centuries. The streets are patrolled by the urban watch, men in simple tunics carrying staffs. Their presence a reminder that the city is not lawless. The guilds control the trades, bakers, butchers, silkworkers, goldsmiths, and each guild has its own regulations, its own place in the economic hierarchy. Prices are often fixed by the state, and there are severe penalties for fraud or adulteration of goods. This is a city that runs on rules, on traditions that stretch back to the reign of Constantine the Great himself, the emperor who refounded this ancient Greek colony as the new capital of the Roman Empire over 1,000 years ago. As the day wears on, the light begins to change. The sun moves westward, casting longer shadows across the Mies. The crowd thins slightly as people return to their homes for the afternoon meal. You find yourself standing near a public fountain, its water cool and clear, fed by one of the great aqueducts that bring fresh water into the city from distant hills. You cup your hands and drink, and the water is sweet and cold, a small pleasure in the midst of the city's overwhelming sensory richness. You look around, taking in the sights and sounds one more time, the marble columns, the bustling shops, the distant chanting from a church, the laughter of children playing near the fountain. This is Constantinople, and for a moment you feel as though you have always been here, as though this city, with all its beauty and complexity, has always been your home. If the Mies is the artery of the city, then the Great Palace is its beating heart. Located on the southeastern edge of the peninsula, overlooking the Sea of Marmara, the palace is not a single building but a vast complex of halls, courtyards, gardens, and chapels spread over acres of land. It is a city within a city, a labyrinth of power and ceremony where the emperor resides in a splendor that is meant to reflect the glory of God on earth. To live in Constantinople is to live in the shadow of this palace, to be aware, always, that the emperor is present, watching, ruling, embodying the will of the divine. The approach to the palace is carefully controlled. There are no casual visitors here. Guards stand at every entrance, members of the imperial guard known as the excubitors, men chosen for their loyalty and their martial skill. They wear polished armor, bronze breastplates that gleam in the sun, helmets with crests of horsehair, and long spears held upright. Their faces are impassive, but their eyes are watchful. To enter the palace without permission is to risk death. But today, imagine you are part of a delegation, perhaps a group of merchants presenting gifts to the emperor, or foreign ambassadors come to negotiate a treaty. You have been granted an audience, and you are about to witness the full majesty of Byzantine court life. You are led through the Chark Gate, the great bronze entrance to the palace. The gate is massive, its doors covered in intricate reliefs, depicting scenes of imperial victory, emperors on horseback, enemies kneeling in submission, angels descending from heaven to crown the victors. The bronze has been polished until it shines, and the sunlight reflecting off its surface is almost blinding. You pass through, and the noise of the city fades. Inside the palace, everything is quieter, more controlled. Your footsteps echo on marble floors inlaid with geometric patterns of colored stone, red porphyry, green serpentine, white marble. The walls are covered in mosaics, their tiny tiles forming images of saints, emperors, and biblical scenes. Gold tesserae catch the light, making the walls seem to glow. You are led through a series of courtyards, each more elaborate than the last. There are fountains here, their water trickling softly, and gardens planted with roses, lilies, and myrtle. The scent of flowers mingles with the ever-present smell of incense. You see servants moving quietly, carrying trays of food or bundles of linens. Ye are dressed simply, in plain tunics, and they keep their eyes lowered, a mark of respect and subservience. The architecture is a blend of Roman grandeur and Eastern opulence. There are classical columns and arches, but also domes covered in gold leaf, windows of colored glass, and hanging lamps of silver and brass. Finally, you reach the Chrysotriklinos, the Golden Hall, the throne room of the emperor. The doors are opened by guards, and you step inside. The room is vast, its ceiling rising high above you, covered in a dome that is decorated with a mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, Christ the Almighty, staring down with stern, all-seeing eyes. The walls are lined with marble panels and more mosaics depicting the emperors of old, each one crowned and holding the symbols of their office. The floor is a masterpiece of opus sectile, cut stone arranged in intricate patterns that seem to shift and shimmer as you walk across them. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a platform, sits the throne. The throne itself is a marvel. It is made of gold, or at least gilded wood, encrusted with gems, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, that catch the light from the lamps and windows. The emperor sits upon it, and he is a figure of almost supernatural presence. He wears the imperial regalia, a long, flowing robe of purple silk, the fabric so fine it seems to ripple like water. Over this he wears a chlamys, a ceremonial cloak fastened at the shoulder with a massive brooch of gold and pearls. On his head rests the crown, a work of art in itself, gold set with jewels, hung with pendants that frame his face. In one hand he holds the scepter, a long staff topped with a cross. In the other, he holds the akakia, a small purple bag filled with dust, a reminder of mortality and humility, though the effect is anything but humble. The emperor does not speak immediately. The audience is governed by strict protocol, a ceremonial dance that has been refined over centuries. You and your companions approach the throne, moving slowly, your eyes lowered. At a certain distance, you stop and perform the proskinesis, a deep bow, almost a prostration, touching your forehead to the floor. It is an act of submission, an acknowledgement that the emperor is not merely a ruler but the representative of God on earth. When you are permitted to rise, you see that the emperor is watching you, his expression calm and inscrutable. He is surrounded by courtiers, men in rich robes, advisors and officials who stand in ranks on either side of the throne. Some are eunuchs, men who have been castrated as boys and raised in the palace, their high-pitched voices a distinctive sound in the imperial court. The emperor speaks, and his voice is surprisingly soft, yet it carries through the hall. He welcomes you in Greek, his words formal and carefully chosen. Everything he says has been rehearsed, approved by his advisors. There is no spontaneity here, no casual conversation. This is theater, a performance designed to overwhelm and impress. You respond as you have been instructed, presenting your gifts, bolts of silk perhaps, or amphorae of wine, or manuscripts copied by skilled scribes. The emperor accepts them with a gracious nod, and then just as suddenly as the audience began, it is over. You are dismissed, led back through the halls and courtyards, and deposited outside the palace gates. But the memory of the great palace stays with you. It is a place where power is not just held but displayed, where every detail from the mosaics on the walls to the scent of the incense to the silence of the servants is designed to reinforce the idea that the emperor is more than a man. He is a conduit between heaven and earth, a living icon, a figure who embodies the order and stability of the empire itself. To live in Constantinople is to live under the weight of that presence, to know that somewhere within those walls the emperor is praying, or dining, or signing decrees that will shape the fate of millions. It is both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that in this city no one is truly free. All are servants in one way or another of the empire. Beneath the streets and palaces of Constantinople lies another city, a hidden world of darkness and water. The cisterns of Constantinople are one of the city's greatest engineering marvels, vast underground chambers that store millions of gallons of water, ensuring that the city never goes thirsty, even in times of siege. To descend into one of these cisterns is to enter a space that feels almost sacred, a cathedral of water and stone. You find yourself at the entrance to the Basilica Cistern, one of the largest in the city. The entrance is unassuming, a stone stairway descending from street level, flanked by iron railings. You begin your descent, and with each step the noise of the city fades. The air grows cooler, damper, and you can hear the echo of dripping water, a constant rhythmic sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The stairway is long, spiraling down into darkness, lit only by the occasional oil lamp hanging from an iron bracket. At the bottom you emerge into the cistern itself, and the sight takes your breath away. The chamber is immense, stretching away into shadow, supported by hundreds of marble columns. The columns are arranged in neat rows, creating a forest of stone that seems to go on forever. They are magnificent, many of them taken from older buildings, repurposed in the construction of this underground reservoir. Some are smooth and cylindrical, others are carved with fluting, and their capitals are diverse: Ionic, Corinthian, Doric, a catalogue of classical styles brought together in this utilitarian space. The floor of the cistern is covered in water, shallow here but deeper in other places, and it reflects the light from the lamps, creating a shimmering mirror-like surface. The reflection of the columns creates an illusion of infinite depth, as though the cistern extends not just horizontally but vertically as well, a world turned upside down. You walk along the narrow brick pathways that run between the columns, your footsteps echoing in the vast space. The sound of dripping water is constant, and you realize that it is coming from the ceiling, from small fissures where moisture seeps through from the world above. The cistern is not empty of life. Small fish swim in the water, their silver bodies flashing in the lamplight. How they came to be here, you do not know. Perhaps they were brought in as eggs on the feet of birds, or perhaps they descended through the pipes that feed the cistern. They dart and swirl, unbothered by your presence, moving through this subterranean world with the ease of long habitation. The water itself is clear and cold, and you can see the brick floor beneath it, see the patterns laid by ancient builders who never intended this place to be seen by human eyes. As you walk deeper into the cistern, you come upon one of its most curious features. Two of the columns rest on bases that are not simple stone blocks but carved heads, massive stone faces lying on their sides, half submerged in the water. They are Medusa heads, their hair writhing with carved serpents, their expressions fierce and frozen in stone. No one knows why they are here, why these pagan symbols were placed in a Christian city's water supply. Some say they were simply convenient building materials, reused from an older temple. Others whisper that they are guardians, protective spirits meant to ward off evil and keep the water pure. You stand before one of the Medusa heads, looking into its stone eyes, and you feel a shiver run down your spine. This is a place of mystery, a place where the past and present meet in the cold darkness beneath the city. The cisterns serve a vital function. Constantinople is surrounded by water on three sides, but that water is salt, undrinkable. The city depends on fresh water brought from distant springs and reservoirs through a network of aqueducts, the Great Aqueduct of Valens, visible above ground with its massive stone arches, and others that run underground. The cisterns store this water, ensuring a constant supply even when the aqueducts are cut during sieges or when drought reduces the flow. The water from the cisterns is distributed throughout the city through a complex system of pipes and fountains, reaching every neighborhood, every public square, every bathhouse and palace. The existence of these cisterns is a closely guarded secret, known only to a few officials and engineers. In times of siege, an enemy who knew the location of the cisterns might attempt to poison them, and so their entrances are disguised, their existence denied. But the people of the city benefit from them every day, drawing water from fountains that are fed by these underground reservoirs, never knowing the vast dark chambers that lie beneath their feet. You linger in the cistern for a while longer, absorbing the atmosphere, the sense of being in a place that is both ancient and timeless. The columns stand silent and still, their reflections perfect in the still water. The fish continue their endless swimming, and the water continues its slow drip from the ceiling. Eventually you make your way back to the stairway, climbing up toward the light and noise of the city above. As you emerge onto the street, blinking in the bright sunlight, you carry with you the memory of that hidden world, a reminder that Constantinople is a city of layers, of secrets, of depths that are not immediately visible, but that underpin everything above. If the Great Palace is where earthly power resides, then the Hagia Sophia is where divine power is made manifest. The Church of Holy Wisdom is the largest and most magnificent building in Constantinople, and it is the spiritual heart of the entire Orthodox Christian world. To enter it is to step into a space that seems to exist outside of time, a place where the boundary between the mortal and the eternal is blurred, where the prayers of the faithful rise like incense toward heaven. You approach the Hagia Sophia from the Augustine, the great square that lies between the church and the imperial palace. The square is paved in marble, and surrounded by porticos. A tall column stands at its center, topped with a bronze equestrian statue of the Emperor Justinian, the man who commissioned the Hagia Sophia in the 6th century after the previous church burned in riots. The statue shows Justinian in armor, one hand raised as if blessing the city, the other holding a globe surmounted by a cross. The square is busy, filled with pilgrims and clergy, merchants selling religious icons and candles, beggars asking for alms. But all eyes are drawn upward, toward the dome of the Hagia Sophia. The dome is immense, seemingly impossible. It rises over 180 feet above the ground, and its diameter is more than 100 feet across. It appears to float, suspended in the air, its weight supported by a ring of arched windows that allow light to pour in from all sides. The effect is breathtaking, and it has been said that when people first see the dome they believe it is held up not by human engineering but by the hand of God. The exterior of the church is built of brick and stone, its walls plain and functional, but the dome is covered in lead that has weathered to a soft gray, and when the sun strikes it, it glows like molten silver. You climb the steps to the main entrance, passing through a narthex, a long, narrow vestibule that serves as a transition between the outside world and the sacred space within. The narthex is dimly lit, its ceiling low, its walls covered in mosaics of angels and prophets. There is a sense of compression here, a deliberate contrast to what is about to come. You pause as custom dictates to cross yourself and murmur a prayer. Then you push through the heavy bronze doors and step into the nave. The effect is overwhelming. The interior of the Hagia Sophia is a vast open space that seems to swallow you whole. The dome soars above, and the light streaming through its windows creates a soft golden glow that fills the entire church. The walls are covered in marble panels, white, green, pink, veined with gray, polished until they shine like mirrors. Above the marble, the upper walls and the dome itself are covered in mosaics. Gold tesserae predominate, giving the impression that the entire ceiling is made of gold, and set against this shimmering background are images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, angels and saints. Their faces are serene, their eyes large and expressive, their halos made of concentric circles of gold. The floor is paved in marble, arranged in patterns that draw the eye toward the altar at the far end of the nave. The altar itself is separated from the main body of the church by the iconostasis, a screen covered in icons, painted panels depicting scenes from the life of Christ and the saints. The iconostasis is made of wood and silver, and it glitters in the candlelight. Behind it you can see the altar, though only the clergy are permitted to approach it. The altar is draped in cloth of gold, and upon it sit the sacred vessels, the chalice and paten used in the divine liturgy, the central act of Orthodox worship. The air is thick with incense, a heavy, sweet smoke that rises from censers swung by deacons as they move through the church. The scent is intoxicating, almost dizzying, and it mingles with the smell of beeswax from the hundreds of candles that burn throughout the church. The sound is equally enveloping. The divine liturgy is being chanted by the choir, a group of men and boys whose voices rise and fall in a continuous hypnotic melody. The chant is ancient, its rhythms and intervals unchanged for centuries, and it fills the space, echoing off the marble walls and the great dome, creating a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You stand among the congregation, and you realize that you are part of something much larger than yourself. The Hagia Sophia is always filled with people, clergy in their ornate vestments, monks in plain black robes, lay people from every walk of life. Some are standing, some are kneeling, some are prostrating themselves on the floor in an attitude of complete submission. There is no sitting in an Orthodox church. The congregation stands for the entire service, which can last for hours. It is an act of endurance, a physical offering of devotion. The service continues. The deacons move through the church, swinging their censers, the smoke curling upward toward the dome. The priest, hidden behind the iconostasis, chants the prayers in a voice that is amplified by the acoustics of the space. At certain moments, the congregation responds, their voices joining in a chorus that swells and then fades. The liturgy is not just a service, it is a drama, a reenactment of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Every gesture, every prayer, every movement of the clergy has a symbolic meaning, a significance that the faithful understand instinctively. The divine liturgy follows a pattern that has been refined over centuries, a choreography of word and gesture that never varies. It begins with the liturgy of the Word, the reading of Scripture. A deacon emerges from behind the iconostasis carrying a large, ornate book bound in silver and gold. This is the Gospel book, and it is treated with the utmost reverence. The deacon processes through the church, holding the book aloft, and the congregation bows as he passes. He ascends to the ambo, a raised platform in the center of the nave, and he begins to read. His voice is clear and strong, trained to project in this vast space, and the words of the gospel echo off the marble walls. The people listen in silence, their faces upturned, their attention complete. After the reading, the priest delivers a homily, a sermon that explicates the scripture and applies it to the lives of the faithful. The homily is not long. Orthodox preaching is generally brief and to the point, but it is delivered with passion and conviction. The priest speaks of sin and redemption, of the need for repentance, of the mercy of God. He warns against the temptations of the world, against greed and lust and pride. He calls the people to lives of holiness, of charity, of devotion to the church and the empire. The congregation listens, some nodding in agreement, others looking troubled, reflecting on their own failings. Then comes the liturgy of the faithful, the central act of the service. The deacons prepare the altar, arranging the sacred vessels, covering them with richly embroidered cloths. The priest recites the anaphora, the great prayer of consecration, and the congregation falls silent. This is the moment when the bread and wine are transformed, when they become, in the belief of the Orthodox faithful, the actual body and blood of Christ. The mystery is profound, and it is met with awe and reverence. The priest raises the consecrated bread, the lamb, and the people bow deeply, some falling to their knees, some touching their foreheads to the floor. The moment is accompanied by the ringing of bells, small silver bells held by the deacons, their sound high and clear, cutting through the silence. The smoke from the censers thickens, and the air becomes almost opaque, filled with the heavy, sweet scent of frankincense. The light from the windows and lamps catches in the smoke, creating beams and shafts that seem to descend from heaven itself. You feel a sense of transcendence, a feeling that the boundary between the earthly and the divine has become thin, almost permeable. As the service reaches its climax, the priest emerges from behind the iconostasis, carrying the chalice. He holds it aloft, and the congregation falls silent. This is the moment of the Eucharist, the transformation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. The faithful come forward, one by one, to receive communion. They approach with reverence, their heads bowed, their hands crossed over their chests. The priest places a small piece of consecrated bread on their tongues, and they return to their places, their eyes closed, their lips moving in silent prayer. Not everyone receives communion. Some have not prepared themselves through fasting and confession, and they stand aside, watching with longing. The act of receiving the Eucharist is not taken lightly. It requires spiritual preparation, a state of grace that must be earned through prayer and penitence. But even those who do not receive are participants in the mystery, witnesses to the sacred drama that unfolds before them. After the communion, the service begins to wind down. The priest offers final prayers and blessings, and the congregation responds with Amen and Lord have mercy. The deacons move through the church one last time with their censers, blessing the people and the space. Then, slowly, the congregation begins to disperse. They move toward the exits, pausing to venerate icons on the way, kissing the painted wood, touching it with their fingers, and then touching their hearts. This is a gesture of devotion, a physical connection to the sacred. You remain standing, watching, absorbing the experience. The light shifts as the sun moves across the sky, and the mosaics seem to change, the faces of the saints coming alive in the shifting shadows. You feel a profound sense of peace, a connection to something eternal. This is what it means to live in Constantinople, to be surrounded by beauty and devotion, to be part of a tradition that stretches back to the apostles themselves. The Hagia Sophia is not just a building, it is a living presence, a space where the divine and the human meet, where prayers are offered, and it is believed heard. Eventually the service ends. The congregation begins to disperse, moving slowly toward the exits, their voices hushed, their faces serene. You step back out into the sunlight, and the noise of the city rushes back in, the cries of vendors, the clatter of carts, the laughter of children. But the experience of the Hagia Sophia stays with you, a memory of light and incense and chanted prayers, a reminder that in this city, the sacred and the secular are inseparable, two sides of the same coin. The rhythm of life in Constantinople is marked not just by the daily cycle of work and prayer, but by the great festivals of the church calendar. These festivals are moments when the entire city becomes a stage for elaborate religious processions and celebrations, when the streets are filled with clergy and congregants, when the line between worship and spectacle dissolves entirely. Imagine it is the feast of the Dormition of the Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, one of the most important celebrations in the Orthodox year. The day begins early, before dawn, with the ringing of church bells throughout the city. The sound is tremendous, hundreds of bells ringing at once, their tones layering and overlapping, creating a cascading wave of sound that washes over the sleeping city. You rise from your bed and dress quickly, joining the flow of people moving through the darkened streets toward the Hagia Sophia. The church is already filled when you arrive, its interior blazing with light from thousands of candles and lamps. The service is longer and more elaborate than usual, with extended chanting and additional prayers. The Patriarch himself presides, resplendent in gold-embroidered vestments, his mitre glittering with jewels. The Emperor is present too, seated in his elevated box, his presence lending imperial weight to the celebration. When the service concludes, the real spectacle begins, the great procession. The icon of the Virgin, an ancient and sacred image believed to have been painted by Saint Luke himself, is brought out from behind the iconostasis. It is carried by 4 priests, supported on a platform draped in purple silk and decorated with gold and precious stones. The icon itself is covered in a silver riza, a protective covering that leaves only the faces and hands visible, and it is surrounded by offerings, jewels, coins, fragments of rich cloth left by the faithful. As the icon emerges, the congregation falls to their knees, and a collective gasp of reverence fills the air. The procession forms. First come the deacons, swinging their censers, filling the air with clouds of incense. Behind them the choir chants hymns, dedicated to the Virgin, their voices trained and powerful. Then come the priests and bishops, each carrying a candle or a cross. The icon follows, borne aloft on its platform, and behind it comes the Patriarch, walking slowly, his staff tapping on the marble floor. The Emperor joins the procession, walking just behind the Patriarch, a visible demonstration of the unity of church and state. Finally, the people follow, thousands of them, streaming out of the Hagia Sophia and into the streets. The procession moves through the city, following a prescribed route that takes it past major churches and shrines. The streets have been prepared, swept clean, decorated with flowers and banners. People line the route, watching from windows and rooftops, throwing flower petals as the icon passes. The sick and disabled are brought out, their families hoping that proximity to the icon might bring healing. You see mothers holding up their children, old men reaching out to touch the platform, their faces filled with hope and faith. The procession is not silent. The choir continues to sing, and the congregation joins in, their voices rising in hymns that are known by heart. The sound is immense, filling the streets, echoing off the walls of buildings. The smell of incense is everywhere, and the light from the thousands of candles creates a warm, flickering glow. The procession moves slowly, pausing at certain points for prayers and blessings. At one such stop, a miracle is claimed. A blind beggar declares that his sight has been restored, and the crowd erupts in cheers and prayers of thanksgiving. Whether the miracle is genuine or staged, it adds to the fervor of the moment. The procession eventually returns to the Hagia Sophia, and the icon is carried back inside and returned to its place of honor. But the celebration does not end there. The rest of the day is given over to feasting and communal gatherings. Families prepare special meals, and the wealthy distribute food and alms to the poor. The streets are filled with music and laughter, and the taverns do a brisk business. The feast day is a break from the ordinary rhythms of life, a moment when the city collectively pauses to honor the sacred and to reaffirm its devotion. Such festivals occur throughout the year, each marking a different saint or event in the life of Christ. There is the Feast of the Nativity, celebrated with midnight services and gift-giving. There is the Feast of the Epiphany, when the waters of the Golden Horn are blessed and young men dive into the icy water to retrieve a cross thrown by the Patriarch. There is the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, when fragments of the true cross are displayed and venerated. Each festival has its own traditions, its own processions, its own special foods and customs. Together they create a rhythm that structures the year, a cycle of anticipation, celebration, and renewal that binds the community together. Constantinople is a city of commerce, and its wealth is built on trade. It sits at the crossroads of the world, where Europe meets Asia, where the Mediterranean flows into the Black Sea. Goods from the farthest reaches of the known world pass through its markets and warehouses. Silk from China, spices from India, furs from the lands of the Rus, grain from Egypt, wine from Greece, slaves from the Caucasus. To live in Constantinople is to be part of this vast economic machine, whether as a merchant, a craftsman, a dockworker, or a slave. The city's prosperity depends on the labor of thousands, and that labor is organized with a precision that would be the envy of any modern corporation. The guilds are the backbone of the city's economy. Every craft, every trade, has its own guild, and membership is mandatory. There is a guild for bakers, one for butchers, one for goldsmiths, one for silkworkers, one for perfumers. Each guild has its own regulations, its own hierarchy, its own standards of quality. The guilds are overseen by the eparch, the city prefect, who enforces the laws and punishes those who violate them. The Book of the Eparch, a legal code dating back to the 10th century, lays out the rules in exhaustive detail: what prices can be charged, what materials can be used, where shops can be located, how apprentices are to be trained. It is a system designed to prevent fraud, maintain quality, and ensure that the city's economy runs smoothly. Imagine you are a silk worker, a member of one of the most prestigious guilds in the city. Silk is the most valuable commodity in Constantinople, and the production of silk is a closely guarded state secret. The process begins with the silkworms, which are raised in carefully controlled conditions, fed on mulberry leaves, and allowed to spin their cocoons. The cocoons are then boiled, and the silk filaments are carefully unwound, twisted together, and spun into thread. The thread is dyed using expensive pigments: purple from murex shells, crimson from kermes insects, yellow from saffron. The dyed thread is then woven into fabric on large looms, the patterns created by skilled weavers who have trained for years to master their craft. As a silk worker, you spend your days in a workshop near the Mise. The workshop is a long, narrow building with high windows that let in light. The looms are massive, wooden frames that take up most of the space, and the sound of the shuttles moving back and forth is a constant rhythmic clatter. The work is painstaking and requires complete concentration. A single mistake can ruin an entire bolt of fabric, and the cost of such an error is severe. You work alongside a dozen other weavers, all members of the guild. All men. Women are not permitted to work with silk, though they may spin thread at home. The air is filled with the smell of dye and the faint, earthy scent of the silk itself. At midday, you pause for a meal. The guild provides food for its members: bread, cheese, olives, a cup of watered wine. You eat in the courtyard behind the workshop, sitting on a low bench in the shade of a fig tree. The conversation is quiet, focused on the work, on the latest orders from the palace, or from wealthy merchants who will sell the silk abroad. There is a sense of pride in your work, a knowledge that you are part of a tradition that stretches back centuries, that the silk you produce is worn by emperors and kings, that it is a symbol of the city's wealth and power. But not all work in Constantinople is so refined. Down at the docks, the labor is hard and brutal. Dock workers unload ships that arrive from every corner of the empire and beyond. They carry heavy sacks of grain on their shoulders, barrels of wine, amphorae of olive oil, bales of wool. The work is exhausting, and the pay is low, but it is steady, and for many, it is the only option. The docks are a place of noise and chaos, a place where languages mix and tempers flare. Fights break out over nothing: a perceived insult, a stolen loaf of bread, a dispute over pay. The urban watch is always nearby, ready to break up brawls and haul offenders off to the city prisons. The life of a dockworker is one of unrelenting physical labor. You begin work before dawn, when the first ships arrive with the morning tide. The work gangs are organized by foremen, burly men who shout orders and keep track of what is loaded and unloaded. You are assigned to a crew, and together you haul cargo from the ship's holds to the warehouses that line the harbor. The sacks of grain weigh as much as you do, and they must be carried up steep gangplanks and along narrow walkways. Your back aches, your shoulders burn, and your hands are calloused and cracked. But you keep working, because to stop is to lose your place in the crew, and to lose your place is to lose your livelihood. The docks are also a place of danger. Cargo sometimes shifts and falls, crushing anyone unlucky enough to be beneath it. The gangplanks are slippery with seawater and algae, and a misstep can send you tumbling into the harbor. Theft is common, and the foremen are always watching, ready to accuse anyone they suspect of pocketing small items. Punishments for theft are severe. A first offense might result in a beating, a second in the loss of a hand. The docks are governed by their own rough justice, and the law is enforced not by courts but by the foremen and the merchants who control the trade. At midday, the work pauses briefly for a meal. You sit with your fellow workers on the edge of the dock, your legs dangling over the water, eating bread and dried fish washed down with cheap wine. The conversation is rough and often crude, full of complaints about the foreman, the pay, the endless grind of the work. But there is also camaraderie here, a bond forged by shared hardship. These men are your brothers in a way, and you look out for each other, sharing food when someone is short, covering for each other when someone is too sick or injured to work. As the afternoon wears on, the pace of work slows. The ships that arrived in the morning have been unloaded, and new ships are arriving to take on cargo, goods from the city's workshops and markets bound for ports throughout the empire. You help load these ships, the process just as backbreaking as the unloading. By the time the sun sets and the work finally ends, you are exhausted, your body aching, your clothes soaked with sweat. You collect your pay from the foreman, a few copper coins, barely enough to buy food and pay the rent on your cramped room. But it is enough to survive, and you know that tomorrow you will do it all again. The markets of Constantinople are a spectacle in themselves. The main market is near the mace, in a series of covered halls where merchants display their goods. There are separate sections for different types of merchandise. One for textiles, one for food, one for metalwork, one for books and manuscripts. The market is strictly regulated. Prices are posted and enforced, and the Apache's inspectors make regular rounds checking weights and measures, ensuring that goods are not adulterated. Cheating is punished severely. A baker who sells underweight loaves may have his oven destroyed. A wine merchant who waters his product may be whipped in public and expelled from his guild. The market is a place of sensory overload. The sights, sounds, and smells are all overwhelming. A constant assault on the senses. You see piles of vegetables, cabbages, onions, leeks, turnips, their colors bright against the dark wood of the stalls. You see hanging meats, whole lambs, sides of pork, chickens and geese strung up by their feet. You see fish laid out on beds of ice, their scales glittering, their eyes still bright. The smells are equally varied. The earthy scent of fresh bread, the sharp tang of cheese, the pungent aroma of spices, the slightly rotten odor of fish that has been sitting too long in the sun. The sounds are constant. Merchants call out to passers-by, extolling the quality of their goods, offering special prices. Customers haggle, their voices rising in mock outrage at the suggested prices. Children run between the stalls, their laughter and shouts adding to the din. Street performers entertain the crowd. A juggler tosses balls in the air, a musician plays a lute and sings ballads, a snake charmer displays a coiled serpent. The market is not just a place to buy and sell, it is a place to see and be seen, to gather news and gossip, to participate in the life of the city. You wander through the market, taking it all in. You stop at a spice merchant's stall, and the variety is astonishing. There are spices you recognize: pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and others you have never seen before, their names exotic and mysterious. The merchant offers you a sample, a pinch of powder that he assures you is ground ginger from the distant east. You taste it, and it is fiery and sweet at the same time, unlike anything you have experienced. The merchant smiles at your reaction and quotes you a price, but it is far beyond your means, and you move on. You see a bookseller displaying manuscripts, their pages covered in beautiful script, their margins decorated with intricate illuminations. The books are works of theology, mostly, or copies of the Gospels, but there are also works of classical literature, Homer, Plato, Aristotle, preserved and copied by the scribes of the city. The bookseller is a learned man, and he engages you in conversation, discussing the merits of different translations and commentaries. Books are expensive, far too expensive for most people, but they are treasured by those who can afford them, and the bookseller's trade is a respected one. As you leave the market, you pass a slave auction. A small crowd has gathered around a platform where a dozen men, women and children stand in chains. An auctioneer is calling out their qualities. This one is strong and suited for heavy labor. That one is educated and can read and write. This young woman is beautiful and would make a good concubine. The bidding is brisk, and one by one the slaves are sold and led away by their new owners. Slavery is a fact of life in Constantinople, an institution that no one questions. Slaves come from all over, prisoners of war from the empire's frontiers, people captured by pirates and sold in the markets, children sold by desperate parents who cannot afford to feed them. Their lives are hard, and they have no rights, but they are an integral part of the city's economy, and their labor is essential to its functioning. The city's wealth is also built on taxation. The state taxes almost everything: sales, imports, exports, property, inheritances. Tax collectors are a constant presence, and they are universally disliked. They move through the markets and workshops, demanding payment, recording transactions in ledgers. Failure to pay results in confiscation of property, imprisonment, or worse. The taxes fund the imperial administration, the army, the navy, the public works, the aqueducts, the cisterns, the walls. They also fund the emperor's lavish lifestyle and the elaborate ceremonies that define Byzantine court culture. Despite the heavy taxation, there is prosperity in Constantinople, at least for some. The wealthy live in large houses near the palace, their walls decorated with frescoes, their courtyards filled with fountains and gardens. They wear silk and gold. They dine on imported delicacies. They own slaves who attend to their every need. But for the majority, life is harder. They live in cramped apartments, often several families to a building. They eat simple food, bread, vegetables, fish on feast days. They work long hours, and they live with the constant fear of disease, fire, or economic collapse. Yet there is a resilience here, a sense that Constantinople, for all its flaws, is still the greatest city in the world, and that to live here, even in poverty, is better than to live anywhere else. If you want to understand Constantinople, to truly grasp the beating heart of its people, you must go to the Hippodrome. This is not just a place of entertainment. It is a crucible of politics, passion, and violence. It is where the city's social tensions are played out, where the emperor shows himself to his people, and where the factions, the blues and the greens, compete for supremacy in a struggle that sometimes spills over into riot and bloodshed. The Hippodrome is located just south of the Great Palace, connected to it by a series of passages so that the emperor can enter without mingling with the crowds. It is a massive structure, built in the Roman style, an elongated oval, nearly 1,500 feet long and 400 feet wide. It can hold up to 100,000 spectators, though on most days the crowd is smaller. The seating is arranged in tiers, rising steeply from the track, and it is divided by social class. The wealthiest sit in the lower tiers, close to the action, in seats with cushions and awnings to provide shade. The poor sit in the upper tiers, exposed to the sun and rain, packed tightly together on stone benches. The track itself is a long, straight stretch, divided by a central barrier called the spina. The spina is decorated with monuments, obelisks brought from Egypt, bronze statues of horses, columns carved with reliefs of imperial victories. At each end of the track is a turning post, a tall stone marker where the chariots must make their sharp, dangerous turns. The surface of the track is packed earth, and it is meticulously maintained, watered to keep down the dust, raked smooth after each race. Today is a race day, and the city is buzzing with anticipation. The races are held regularly, often on religious feast days or to celebrate imperial anniversaries. They are free to attend, a gift from the emperor to his people, a way to keep them entertained and distracted from the hardships of daily life. You make your way to the Hippodrome in the morning, joining a throng of people moving through the streets. The atmosphere is festive, almost carnival-like. Vendors are selling food, roasted nuts, honey cakes, sausages on sticks. Street performers are juggling or playing music. Children are running and shouting. And everywhere you hear people arguing about the races, debating which team will win, which charioteer is the best. You enter the Hippodrome through one of the many vaulted tunnels that lead to the seating. The noise hits you immediately. A roar of voices, laughter, shouting. The sound of tens of thousands of people all talking at once. You find a seat in the upper tiers, squeezing in between a laborer in a stained tunic and a group of young men who are already drunk, passing a wineskin between them. The view from here is excellent. You can see the entire track, the spina with its monuments, and directly across from you the imperial box, the kathisma, where the emperor will sit. The kathisma is a magnificent structure, a raised platform with a gilded canopy and marble columns. It is draped with purple silk, and the imperial throne sits at its center. As the sun climbs higher, the emperor arrives. He emerges from a doorway that connects directly to the palace, accompanied by his bodyguards and courtiers. The crowd erupts in cheers and acclamations, a ritualized chant that has been rehearsed over centuries. Many years to the emperor, victory to the emperor. The emperor raises his hand in acknowledgement, and the noise swells even louder. He takes his seat, and the races can begin. The chariots are lined up at the starting gates, 12 in total, divided into 4 teams. The blues and the greens are the dominant factions, each with their own supporters, their own colors, their own identity. The blues are associated with the wealthy, the aristocracy, the establishment. The greens are seen as the party of the common people. Though this is an oversimplification, both factions include people from all walks of life. The other 2 factions, the reds and the whites, are less prominent and often ally with one of the larger factions. The charioteers are celebrities, famous throughout the empire. They are often slaves or freedmen, men of low birth who have risen to wealth and fame through their skill and daring. They wear the colors of their faction, blue or green tunics and helmets, leather greaves to protect their shins. The chariots themselves are lightweight, little more than a platform on 2 wheels, drawn by 4 horses. The horses are bred for speed and endurance, and the best of them are worth small fortunes. A trumpet sounds, and the gates spring open. The chariots burst forward, the horses straining, the wheels kicking up clouds of dust. The crowd roars, and you find yourself on your feet, shouting along with everyone else. The chariots thunder down the track, jockeying for position. The first turn is critical. This is where many races are won or lost. The charioteers lean into the turn, their bodies almost horizontal, the reins wrapped around their waists so they can use their whole bodies to control the horses. The outside chariot swings wide, and the inside chariot cuts sharply, the wheels scraping against the spina. They make the turn, and the race is on. Lap after lap, the chariots circle the track. The noise is deafening, the pounding of hooves, the creaking of wheels, the shouts of the crowd. Dust fills the air, and the smell of sweat and horse is overwhelming. The charioteers are fearless, taking risks that seem insane, cutting off opponents, forcing them into the barriers, whipping their horses to greater speed. Accidents happen. A chariot tips over, the charioteer thrown clear, the horses dragging the wreckage. Another chariot crashes into the fallen one, and the crowd gasps. Slaves rush onto the track to clear the debris and tend to the injured. The race ends in a blur of speed and noise. One of the green charioteers crosses the finish line first, and his supporters explode in celebration. Across from you, in the section dominated by green supporters, people are embracing, waving banners, chanting victory songs. The blue supporters are sullen, some shouting insults, others throwing food at the greens. The tension is palpable, and you can feel that this is more than just a game. This is a rivalry that runs deep, a proxy for all the divisions and frustrations of the city. As the day wears on, more races are run. Between races, there are other entertainments, acrobats, animal displays, mock battles. But the focus is always on the chariots, and the crowd never loses its intensity. You notice that the emperor is watching not just the races but the crowd. He is gauging their mood, listening to their chants. The hippodrome is a place where the people can speak to their ruler, where they can express their grievances, and the emperor knows that he ignores them at his peril. More than once, riots have started in the hippodrome. Riots that have spread through the city and threatened the throne itself. As the sun begins to set, the final race is run. The emperor rises from his seat and departs, and the crowd begins to disperse. You leave the hippodrome exhausted, your throat sore from shouting, your tunic soaked with sweat. But you feel exhilarated, connected to the life of the city in a way that is hard to describe. The hippodrome is where Constantinople is most itself, loud, passionate, divided, and utterly alive. Away from the grandeur of the palace and the spectacle of the hippodrome, life in Constantinople unfolds in quieter, more intimate spaces. The homes of the city's residents vary greatly depending on wealth and status. But even the humblest dwelling is part of a carefully ordered world, a world governed by tradition, family, and faith. If you are a person of modest means, perhaps a craftsman or a small merchant, you likely live in an insula, a multi-story apartment building. These buildings are common throughout the city, rising 3 or 4 stories high, their walls made of brick or stone, their upper floors often extending out over the street on wooden supports. The ground floor is typically occupied by shops or workshops, their doors opening directly onto the street. Above, the residential floors are divided into small apartments, each occupied by a family or sometimes by multiple families sharing a single space. Your apartment is small, perhaps 2 or 3 rooms, reached by a narrow staircase that creaks with age. The walls are plastered and whitewashed, though the plaster is cracked in places, and the whitewash has yellowed with time. The floors are bare stone or packed earth, covered here and there with woven mats. There are no windows facing the street, only small openings high on the walls that let in light and air, but offer little view of the outside world. Privacy is a luxury you do not have. The walls are thin, and you can hear your neighbors, their conversations, their arguments, the crying of their children. The main room serves multiple purposes. It is where you eat, where you work on tasks that can be done at home, where you receive the few guests who come to visit. In one corner, there is a small hearth, little more than a raised platform of brick where a charcoal fire burns. The fire is used for cooking and for warmth in the winter months, though the smoke has no proper chimney and instead seeps out through cracks in the ceiling and walls, leaving a layer of soot on everything. The furniture is simple, a low table, a few stools, perhaps a chest for storing clothes and linens. There are icons on the walls, painted on wooden panels, depicting Christ, the Virgin Mary, or your family's patron saint. Before these icons, small oil lamps burn day and night, their flickering flames a constant reminder of the sacred presence that watches over your home. Your family is the center of your life. If you are a man, you are the head of the household, responsible for providing for your wife, your children, and any elderly relatives who live with you. Your wife's domain is the home. She does not go out into the city unaccompanied. To do so would invite scandal. Her days are spent managing the household, preparing meals, weaving cloth, mending clothes, caring for the children. She rises before dawn to light the fire and bake bread, mixing flour and water and a bit of leaven saved from the previous day's baking. The bread is shaped into round loaves and placed on a flat stone near the coals. The smell of baking bread fills the apartment, a warm, yeasty aroma that is one of the comforts of home. Meals are simple but regular. Breakfast is bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps with a bit of cheese or a handful of olives. The midday meal is the largest, bread again with vegetables cooked in olive oil, lentils or beans seasoned with garlic and herbs, sometimes a small piece of fish if money allows. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days and special occasions. Dinner is lighter, often just bread and wine, or a porridge made from barley or millet. Water is drawn from the public fountains that are scattered throughout the city, carried home in clay amphorae. The water is clean, thanks to the aqueducts, and it is one of the city's great blessings. Children are a constant presence. If you have children, and most families have several, though infant mortality is high, they fill the apartment with noise and energy. Boys are taught their father's trade, spending their days in the workshop or accompanying him on errands. By the time they are 10 or 12, they are apprentices, learning the skills that will allow them to support their own families one day. Girls stay home with their mothers, learning to cook, to weave, to manage a household. Education, in the formal sense, is limited. Only the wealthy can afford tutors. Most children learn to read and write at church schools, where priests teach the basics of literacy using the Psalms and the Gospels as texts. The goal is not intellectual development, but the ability to read scripture and participate in the liturgy. For boys from wealthier families, education is a more serious affair. They are sent to schools where they study not just scripture but classical literature, rhetoric, mathematics, and philosophy. The curriculum is based on the trivium and quadrivium, the 7 liberal arts that have formed the foundation of education since ancient times. Students read Homer and Virgil, Plato and Aristotle, learning to write and speak in the elevated Greek that is the mark of an educated person. They study geometry and astronomy, learning the structure of the cosmos as understood by the ancients. They practice rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, which is essential for anyone who hopes to make a career in government or the church. The schools are run by private tutors, men who have themselves received a classical education and who now earn their living by passing it on to the next generation. The tutors are strict disciplinarians, and they do not hesitate to use the rod to enforce attention and obedience. A student who fails to memorize his lessons or who shows disrespect may be beaten, and such punishments are considered not just acceptable but necessary for proper education. The students sit on benches in small, cramped rooms, their wax tablets on their laps, scratching out their exercises with iron styluses, while the tutor paces back and forth, reciting passages from the classics and demanding that the students repeat them from memory. For girls, even from wealthy families, formal education is rare. The prevailing belief is that women do not need learning beyond what is necessary to manage a household and raise children. A girl is taught to read, perhaps, so that she can follow the liturgy and read devotional texts, but she is not taught rhetoric or philosophy. Her education focuses on practical skills, cooking, weaving, embroidery, the management of servants. She is also taught modesty and obedience, for these are considered the most important virtues for a woman. Her primary duty is to her family, and her success is measured not by intellectual achievement but by the smoothness with which she runs her household and the quality of the children she raises. There are exceptions, of course. Some women, particularly those from the highest levels of society, receive a broader education. The empress and the women of the imperial family are often well-read, versed in theology and history, capable of engaging in learned conversations with scholars and churchmen. There are also a few women who become scholars in their own right, though they are rare and their achievements are often obscured by the male-dominated world in which they live. One such woman is Anna Komnene, a princess and historian who wrote a detailed account of her father's reign, demonstrating a mastery of classical Greek and a sophisticated understanding of politics and military strategy. But Anna is an exception, and her work was criticized by some contemporaries as unseemly for a woman. Life is governed by the rhythms of the church calendar. Sundays and feast days are observed strictly. Work stops, and the family attends services at the local church. These services are long, often several hours, and they are followed by communal meals or gatherings with neighbors. The great feasts, Christmas, Easter, the Feast of the Assumption, are celebrated with special intensity. Homes are cleaned, special foods are prepared, children are given small gifts. These are the moments when the hardships of daily life are set aside, when the family comes together in joy and thanksgiving. But life is also marked by hardship and uncertainty. Disease is a constant threat. Plague sweeps through the city periodically, killing thousands. There is no understanding of contagion, no effective medicine. People pray, they light candles before icons, they carry relics or holy water. When someone falls ill, the family gathers around, murmuring prayers, waiting to see if the person will recover or die. Death is a frequent visitor. Children die of fevers, women die in childbirth, men die in accidents or in the violence that sometimes erupts in the streets. When someone dies, the body is washed and wrapped in a shroud, then carried to the church for a funeral service. Burial takes place in a cemetery outside the city walls, the grave marked with a simple stone or wooden cross. Women's lives in particular are circumscribed by strict social norms. A respectable woman does not go out into the streets alone. To do so would invite scandal and damage her reputation. If she must leave the house, she is accompanied by a servant or a male relative, and she often wears a veil that covers her face, a sign of modesty and respectability. The market, the bathhouse, even the church, these are spaces that women navigate with care, always conscious of being watched, always aware that their behavior reflects not just on themselves but on their families. For the wealthy, women's lives are even more restricted. They live in separate quarters within the house, a space called the gynaikonitis, where they spend most of their time. These quarters are comfortable, furnished with cushions and carpets, decorated with tapestries, but they are also a form of confinement. The gynaikonitis has its own courtyard, often with a garden, where the women can take the air without being seen by outsiders. Here they gather with female relatives and friends, sharing news and gossip, working on embroidery, supervising the servants. It is a world unto itself, separate from the public life of the city. Yet within this restricted sphere, women wield considerable power. They manage the household, controlling the purse strings, directing the servants, making decisions about what is bought and sold. They arrange marriages for their children, negotiating with other families to secure advantageous matches. They network with other women, building alliances and friendships that can be as important as the political alliances forged by their husbands. In the imperial family, women can be particularly powerful. The empress is not just the emperor's wife. She is a political figure in her own right, capable of influencing policy, patronizing artists and scholars, and even in some cases ruling as regent for a young or incapable emperor. Despite these hardships, there is a sense of community, of belonging. Your neighbors are not just people who live nearby. They are part of your extended family. You help each other in times of need. You celebrate together. You mourn together. The apartment building is a small world, a microcosm of the larger city, and within it you find support and companionship. As night falls, the city grows quieter. The streets empty as people retreat to their homes. You light an oil lamp, its flame small and steady, casting long shadows on the walls. The family gathers for evening prayers, kneeling before the icons, reciting the words you have known since childhood. Outside, the city is dark, lit only by the occasional torch or lantern. You hear the sound of the night watch passing, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, their voices calling out the hour. You lie down on your sleeping mat, a thin layer of wool spread on the floor, and you pull a blanket over yourself. The apartment is cold, the fire has died to embers, but you are tired, and sleep comes quickly. Tomorrow the rhythm will begin again. Constantinople is not just a city of its own people. It is a crossroads where the entire known world meets. On any given day, the streets and markets are filled with visitors from distant lands, merchants, pilgrims, diplomats, scholars, adventurers. To walk through Constantinople is to hear a dozen languages, to see 100 different styles of dress, to encounter people whose customs and beliefs are utterly foreign to your own. This cosmopolitan character is one of the city's defining features, and it shapes the life of every resident. The foreign merchants are the most visible. They come from every corner of the Mediterranean and beyond, from Venice and Genoa, from Amalfi and Pisa, from the Arab lands of the East, from the steppes of Russia, from the kingdoms of Armenia and Georgia. Each group has its own quarter in the city, its own churches and warehouses, its own customs and privileges. The Venetians, in particular, have a large presence. They have been granted trading rights by the emperor, and they dominate much of the city's maritime commerce. Their quarter is a busy, prosperous district near the Golden Horn, filled with the sounds of Italian speech, the smell of wine and cheese imported from their homeland, the sight of their distinctive red-sailed ships at anchor. The Genoese have their own quarter, across the Golden Horn in the suburb of Galata. From their fortified tower, they watch the shipping in the harbor, and they compete fiercely with the Venetians for control of the lucrative Black Sea trade. The tension between the two Italian city-states is palpable, and fights sometimes break out between their merchants and sailors. The Byzantine authorities try to keep the peace, but they are often overwhelmed by the wealth and power of these foreign communities. The Russians come from the north, down the great rivers, bringing furs and honey and slaves. They are big, fair-haired men who speak a Slavic language that sounds harsh to Byzantine ears. They worship in the Orthodox faith, like the Byzantines, but their customs are different. Their icons painted in a style that is more primitive, more direct. They stay in their own fondaco, a combination warehouse and inn, and they are watched carefully by the authorities, who fear their potential for violence and disorder. There are also merchants from the Muslim world, Arabs, Persians, Turks. They bring spices and perfumes, carpets and precious stones. They are allowed to trade in the city, but they are not permitted to live within the walls permanently. They stay in their own caravanserais outside the gates, and they come into the city during the day to conduct business. Relations between Christians and Muslims are complex. There is trade and diplomacy, but also deep suspicion and occasional hostility. The memory of centuries of warfare is still fresh, and the Crusades have left scars on both sides. Pilgrims are another constant presence. Constantinople is a major destination for Christian pilgrims from all over Europe. They come to venerate the city's countless relics, fragments of the true cross, the crown of thorns, the bones of saints. The city's churches are filled with these sacred objects, and the pilgrims move from one to another, praying, making offerings, seeking blessings and miracles. Some pilgrims are wealthy, traveling in comfort with servants and baggage trains. Others are poor, walking barefoot, begging for alms, sleeping in the streets or in the courtyards of churches. The presence of so many pilgrims creates opportunities for those who cater to them: innkeepers, guides, sellers of religious souvenirs, even thieves who prey on the unwary. Diplomats are a more select group. They come from the courts of kings and emperors, bearing letters and gifts, negotiating treaties and alliances. The Byzantine court receives them with great ceremony, for diplomacy is an art that Constantinople has perfected over centuries. The reception of a foreign ambassador is a carefully choreographed event, designed to impress and intimidate. The ambassador is led through a series of increasingly magnificent rooms, each more splendid than the last, until finally he is brought before the emperor in the throne room. There, he performs the proskinesis, prostrating himself before the throne, acknowledging the emperor's superiority. Gifts are exchanged. The emperor gives lavish presents of silk and gold, and the ambassador presents offerings from his own ruler. Then the real negotiations begin, conducted through interpreters, often lasting for weeks or months. The diplomatic quarter of the city is a world unto itself, filled with intrigue and espionage. Every ambassador is watched by Byzantine officials, who report on his meetings and conversations. Every ambassador also has his own spies, gathering information about the strength of the Byzantine military, the state of the emperor's health, the factions at court. Information is currency, and those who possess it can trade it for gold or favors. The Byzantine bureaucracy is adept at managing these foreign representatives, playing them off against each other, extracting concessions, maintaining the appearance of imperial power, even when the reality is less impressive. Scholars come to Constantinople as well, drawn by its libraries and its reputation as a center of learning. They come from the Latin West, where knowledge of Greek has been largely lost, and they seek to study the manuscripts that are preserved in the city's monasteries and scriptoria. Some come to learn medicine, for Byzantine physicians are renowned for their skill and knowledge. Others come to study theology or philosophy, sitting at the feet of Byzantine masters, copying manuscripts to take back to their homelands. The presence of these scholars creates a lively intellectual atmosphere, with debates and discussions in the porticos and courtyards, in the libraries and lecture halls. But not all visitors to Constantinople are welcome. The city is also a magnet for adventurers, con artists and criminals. There are charlatans who claim to have relics for sale: a vial of the Virgin's milk, a splinter from the cross, a cloth that touched the body of Christ. Most of these are fakes, but the demand is so great that the trade flourishes. There are alchemists who promise to turn lead into gold, astrologers who offer to read the future in the stars, miracle workers who claim to heal the sick and raise the dead. The authorities try to crack down on these frauds, but they are difficult to catch, and they often have protectors among the wealthy who are willing to pay for their services, real or imagined. The diversity of Constantinople is both a strength and a source of tension. The mixing of so many different peoples creates a vibrant, dynamic culture, but it also leads to conflicts. There are riots between different ethnic groups, disputes over precedence and privilege, resentments over wealth and status. The Byzantine state tries to manage these tensions through a combination of law, force, and diplomacy. It grants privileges to some groups while restricting others. It plays factions off against each other, preventing any one group from becoming too powerful. It maintains a complex web of regulations and controls, ensuring that the city's diversity does not descend into chaos. For those who live in Constantinople, the presence of so many foreigners is simply part of daily life. You grow accustomed to hearing strange languages, seeing unfamiliar faces, encountering customs that seem bizarre or even shocking. You learn to navigate this diversity, to find your place within it. You may develop friendships with people from other lands, or you may view them with suspicion and hostility. But either way, you cannot escape the fact that Constantinople is a city of the world, a place where the boundaries between peoples and cultures are constantly being negotiated and renegotiated. To live in Constantinople is to live in a city that is perpetually aware of its own vulnerability. The Great Walls may seem impregnable, but they are a reminder that the city has enemies, that beyond those walls, there are forces that would destroy it if given the chance. The defense of the city is entrusted to a complex system of military units, and to serve in one of these units is to take on a role that is both honorable and dangerous. The most famous of these units is the Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards. The Varangians are not native to Constantinople. They are Northerners, Vikings, and later Scandinavians and Anglo-Saxons who have come to the city seeking fortune and glory. They are tall, fair-haired men who tower over most Byzantines, and they carry enormous double-bladed axes that they wield with terrifying skill. To be a Varangian is to be part of an elite, to be trusted by the emperor himself, to be paid in gold and granted privileges that ordinary soldiers can only dream of. Imagine you are a Varangian, a man who has traveled from the cold lands of the north to serve in the warm, glittering capital of the empire. You arrived in Constantinople several years ago, having journeyed down the great rivers of the Roselands trading and raiding until you reached the Black Sea. From there you sailed to the city, and you presented yourself to the captain of the Varangian Guard. You were accepted. Your size, your strength, and your reputation as a warrior spoke for themselves. You swore an oath of loyalty to the emperor, an oath that you take seriously, for among your people, an oath is sacred, and to break it is to bring shame not just on yourself but on your ancestors. Your life is now centered on the great palace. You live in barracks near the palace gates, a long, low building with rows of beds and a communal dining hall. The barracks are plain but comfortable, a far cry from the icy halls of your homeland. You share the space with your fellow Varangians, men who have become your brothers. You train together every day, practicing with your axes, drilling in formation, preparing for the moment when you will be called upon to defend the emperor. The training is rigorous, and it keeps you sharp, but there is also time for leisure. You drink together, you gamble, you tell stories of battles fought and enemies slain. There is a camaraderie here, a bond forged in shared danger and shared loyalty. Your primary duty is to guard the emperor. When the emperor appears in public, at the hippodrome, in the Hagia Sophia, at ceremonial processions, you are there, standing at attention, your axe resting on your shoulder. You wear armor, a coat of mail that reaches to your knees, a helmet with a nose guard, and a cloak dyed in the emperor's colors. You are a symbol as much as a soldier, a reminder that the emperor is protected by the finest warriors in the world. But your role is not merely ceremonial. You are prepared to kill and to die to protect your lord. More than once, you have seen plots against the emperor uncovered, conspirators dragged away to torture and execution. You know that the palace is a place of intrigue, that behind every smile there may be a knife. You trust no one except your fellow Varangians. The pay is excellent. You receive a regular salary in gold, far more than you could earn in your homeland. You are also entitled to a share of any plunder taken in war, and you have the right to loot the palace when an emperor dies, a tradition that has made the Varangian Guard wealthy. You send some of your gold home to your family, and you save the rest. One day you plan to return to the north, to buy land, to marry, to live out your days as a prosperous landowner. But for now, you are content to serve, to enjoy the luxuries of Constantinople, to feel the weight of your axe in your hand. But not all soldiers in Constantinople are as privileged as the Varangians. The majority of the city's defenders are ordinary men, members of the theme system, the provincial military organization that forms the backbone of the Byzantine army. If you are a theme soldier, you are a farmer or a craftsman who also serves as a soldier. You have been granted a plot of land by the state, and in return, you are required to provide military service when called upon. You own your own equipment, a helmet, a spear, a shield, and you are expected to maintain it in good condition. When the call to arms comes, you leave your farm or your workshop and report to your unit. You march to wherever you are needed, whether it is to defend the city walls, to repel an invasion, or to join a campaign against the empire's enemies. The life of a theme soldier is hard. You are not well paid, and you are often away from home for months at a time. The campaigns are brutal, long marches through difficult terrain, battles fought in scorching heat or freezing cold, the constant threat of ambush. You have seen men die, cut down in battle, succumbing to disease, or simply disappearing in the chaos of retreat. You have seen cities burned, fields laid waste, populations enslaved. But you are proud of your service. You are defending the empire, the Christian world, the legacy of Rome. You are part of a tradition that stretches back centuries, and you take comfort in that. When you return home, you are greeted as a hero by your family and neighbors. Your children look up to you, and your wife is grateful that you have survived. You resume your work, tending your fields, practicing your trade, but you know that the call may come again, and when it does, you will answer. The walls of Constantinople are the city's greatest defense, and to stand guard on those walls is to be acutely aware of the city's history and its vulnerability. The walls are manned day and night by soldiers drawn from the city garrison and the theme units. You stand on the parapet, looking out over the moat and the fields beyond, scanning the horizon for any sign of an approaching army. The walls are thick, 20 feet or more, and they are equipped with battlements, arrow slits, and platforms for catapults and ballistae. Below you, in the towers, there are supplies, food, water, weapons, enough to withstand a siege. The view from the walls is both beautiful and sobering. To the west, you see the land stretching away toward the distant hills, fields and orchards and small villages. To the east, you see the city itself, the domes and rooftops, the smoke rising from thousands of hearths. And in your mind, you see the history, the sieges that have been repelled, the armies that have broken themselves against these walls. You know that those walls have held for 1,000 years, but you also know that nothing lasts forever. You mutter a prayer, asking for strength and vigilance, and you continue your watch. There are moments in the life of a city when everything changes, when the world you have known is shattered and a new and terrible reality takes its place. For Constantinople, such moments have come more than once, but none are more seared into memory than the great sieges, whether it is the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when the city was sacked by fellow Christians, or the final, catastrophic fall to the Ottomans in 1453. Let us imagine the latter, the end of an era, the moment when the last remnants of the Roman Empire finally succumbed to the relentless pressure of a new and rising power. It is the spring of 1453, and the city is surrounded. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, has brought an army that is said to number over 100,000 men. They camp outside the walls, their tents stretching as far as the eye can see, their banners fluttering in the breeze. The Sultan has brought cannons, massive bronze guns that fire stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. These cannons are a new technology, and they are terrifying. They are aimed at the walls, and when they fire, the ground shakes, and the air fills with smoke and the sound of thunder. The stone balls smash into the walls, sending up clouds of dust and debris. Slowly, the walls begin to crack. You are a citizen of Constantinople, and you have been pressed into service to defend the city. You are not a soldier by training, but every able-bodied man is needed. You have been given a spear and a helmet, and you have been assigned to a section of the wall near the gate of St. Romanos, where the Ottoman assault is expected to be fiercest. You stand on the parapet with a few dozen others, looking out at the enemy encampment. The sight is overwhelming. You can see the cannons, their barrels gleaming in the sunlight, and you can see the soldiers, thousands upon thousands of them, preparing for the assault. The days pass in a blur of fear and exhaustion. The cannons fire continuously, day and night, and the noise is deafening. You learn to duck when you hear the roar, to press yourself against the wall and pray that the stone ball will miss you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You see men killed, crushed by falling stones, torn apart by shrapnel. The bodies are carried away, and new men take their places. The walls are breached in several places, and you work alongside others to shore them up with timbers and barrels filled with earth. It is back-breaking labor, and there is no rest. The work of repairing the walls is constant and desperate. You spend your nights hauling stones and timbers, working by the light of torches, your hands bleeding and raw. The stones are heavy, and they must be fitted precisely into the gaps left by the cannon fire. You work alongside monks and priests, noblemen and beggars, all of you united in the desperate effort to keep the walls standing. The mortar is mixed in large wooden troughs, and you carry buckets of it up ladders to the workers above. The smell of lime is sharp and burning, and it stings your eyes and throat. During the day, when the Ottoman assaults are most fierce, you stand on the walls with your spear, watching the enemy prepare for the next attack. You can see their engineers constructing siege towers, massive wooden structures on wheels that they will roll up to the walls. You can see miners digging tunnels, trying to undermine the foundations. The Byzantine engineers counter with their own mines, and you hear the muffled explosions underground as the two sides battle in the darkness beneath the earth. The psychological toll of the siege is as heavy as the physical. You are constantly afraid, your nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every sound makes you jump, a door slamming, a dog barking, the cry of a child. You have nightmares when you sleep, dreams of being buried alive under falling stones, of drowning in blood. You wake in the darkness, your heart pounding, unable to remember where you are. The other defenders are in the same state. You see men weeping, men praying frantically, men staring into space with empty eyes. Food is running short. The city has been under siege for weeks, and supplies are dwindling. The bread ration is reduced, then reduced again. You eat what you can, stale bread, a bit of cheese, water that tastes of rust. Hunger is a constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that never goes away. You see people in the streets, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. The wealthy have fled or are hiding in their homes, hoarding what little they have. The poor suffer the most, and you see children begging for food, their bellies swollen from hunger. The markets are almost empty now. The few goods that remain are sold at exorbitant prices, far beyond what ordinary people can afford. You see fights break out over a single loaf of bread, neighbors turning on each other in desperation. The city's order is beginning to fray, and you sense that the social fabric that has held Constantinople together for so long is starting to tear. Crime increases, theft, assault, even murder. The urban watch is overwhelmed, and they focus their efforts on protecting the wealthy districts, leaving the poor neighborhoods to fend for themselves. There are rumors everywhere, whispered in the streets and in the churches. Some say that a relief force is coming from the west, that Christian armies are marching to save the city. Others say that the emperor has secret negotiations with the sultan, that a deal is being made to spare the city if it surrenders. Still others speak of divine intervention, of visions and prophecies, of saints who have appeared in dreams promising victory. But as the days pass and no relief comes, hope begins to fade, replaced by a grim resignation. The mood in the city is one of desperation mixed with a grim determination. The emperor, Constantine, is a constant presence on the walls, encouraging the defenders, praying with them, fighting alongside them. He is a brave man, and his courage gives you strength. The people pray ceaselessly. The Hagia Sophia is filled day and night with worshippers, their voices raised in hymns and lamentations. Relics are brought out and paraded through the streets. Icons, fragments of the true cross, the bones of saints. The people believe that if they pray hard enough, if they are faithful enough, God will save them. But deep down, you sense that this time, prayer may not be enough. As the siege drags on, strange things begin to happen. The moon appears during a lunar eclipse, turning blood red, and people take it as an omen. A statue of the Virgin is carried through the streets in a procession, and it slips from its bearer's hands and falls to the ground. The crowd gasps, seeing it as a sign that the Virgin has abandoned the city. A thick fog descends on Constantinople, unusual for this time of year, and when it lifts, people claim to see strange lights flickering around the dome of the Hagia Sophia. Some interpret these as signs of divine protection, others see them as harbingers of doom. The final assault comes in the early morning hours of May 29th. You are awakened by the sound of drums and trumpets, the enemy's battle cry rising in a terrible roar. You rush to your post on the wall, and you see them coming. Wave after wave of soldiers, climbing ladders, charging toward the breaches in the wall. The Ottomans are fierce, their faces set in determination, their weapons gleaming. You fight as best you can, thrusting your spear at the men trying to climb over the wall, throwing stones, pouring boiling oil. The battle is chaos, a nightmare of noise and blood and smoke. The air is filled with screams, the screams of the wounded, the dying, the terrified. You see a man next to you take an arrow in the throat, and he falls backward, clutching at the shaft, blood pouring between his fingers. You see another defender beaten back by 3 Ottoman soldiers, his body hacked to pieces before they move on. The smell is overwhelming, blood and sweat and gunpowder and burning wood. Your arms ache from wielding the spear, your lungs burn from the smoke, and your ears ring from the constant din of battle. The wall is breached. The enemy pours through, and there is nothing you can do to stop them. You retreat, joining the flood of people fleeing toward the center of the city. The streets are pandemonium, people running, screaming, trying to find safety. You hear the sound of the Ottoman soldiers behind you, their shouts of victory. You see houses burning, people being cut down. You run until you can run no more, and then you collapse in a doorway, gasping for breath, your heart pounding. The city has fallen. The realization sinks in slowly, a cold, terrible truth. Constantinople, the city that has stood for over 1,000 years, the new Rome, the heart of Christendom, is no more. You hear the distant sound of looting, of screams, of the victors claiming their prize. You close your eyes, and you weep, not just for yourself, but for everything that has been lost. The hours that follow the fall are a nightmare. You hide in your doorway too terrified to move, listening to the sounds of the city being torn apart. You hear the crash of doors being broken down, the shouts of Ottoman soldiers searching houses for plunder and captives. You hear women screaming, children crying, the clash of weapons as the last defenders are hunted down and killed. The smell of smoke grows stronger as fires break out across the city, fed by looted furnishings, spilled oil, the wooden structures that are everywhere in Constantinople. Eventually you venture out, driven by thirst and hunger. The streets are a scene of devastation. Bodies lie where they fell, Byzantine soldiers and civilians alike, their blood pooling on the cobblestones. Buildings have been ransacked, their doors hanging open, their contents scattered. You see a church that has been violated, its icons torn from the walls, its altar cloths ripped away, its sacred vessels stolen. An old priest lies dead on the threshold, his hands still clutching a cross. You make your way toward the harbor, thinking perhaps to find a boat, to escape somehow. But the harbor is controlled by the Ottomans now, their ships filling the Golden Horn, their soldiers guarding the docks. Groups of prisoners are being herded onto ships, men, women, children, all destined for the slave markets of Adrianople and Bursa.
You see faces you recognize.
Neighbors, friends, people you prayed with in church, people you saw every day in the market. Now they are captives, their futures uncertain, their lives forever changed. The Sultan, Mehmed VII, has given his soldiers 3 days to plunder the city. This is the traditional right of a conquering army, and the soldiers take full advantage. They move through the streets systematically, claiming whatever they can carry: gold and silver, jewelry, fine cloth, weapons, tools, anything of value is seized. The wealthier homes are stripped to the walls, their treasures loaded onto carts and carried away. The poorer homes are ransacked as well, though there is less to take. Even the churches are not spared. Chalices and patens, reliquaries and censers, candlesticks and lamps, all are melted down or sold. But there are also moments of mercy and unexpected humanity. Some Ottoman soldiers, moved by pity or greed or simple pragmatism, allow families to ransom themselves. A wealthy merchant might pay a soldier to spare his family and his home, and the soldier, calculating that cash in hand is better than uncertain plunder, agrees. There are also stories of soldiers protecting those they have captured, guarding them from other soldiers, keeping them safe until they can be sold or ransomed. War is brutal, but it is also complex, and not every conqueror is a monster, not every victim without resources. On the 4th day, the plunder ends. The Sultan rides into the city, and his presence imposes order. He goes first to the Hagia Sophia, and there, in the great church that has been the heart of Byzantine Christianity for 1,000 years, he orders that it be converted into a mosque. The cross is torn down from the dome, and a crescent is raised in its place. A mihrab is carved into the east wall, indicating the direction of Mecca, and a minbar is constructed for the Friday prayers. The mosaics are covered with plaster, hidden from view, and the church's Christian identity is erased or at least concealed. The Sultan declares that Constantinople, now renamed Istanbul, will be the capital of his empire. He begins the work of rebuilding and repopulating. He orders that those who fled can return safely, and he invites Muslims from Anatolia to settle in the city. He also allows the Christian population to remain, placing them under the authority of the Patriarch, who becomes their civil as well as religious leader. This policy of relative tolerance will characterize Ottoman rule for centuries, and it allows the Greek community to survive and even in some ways to thrive. For you, and for thousands like you, the fall of Constantinople marks the end of one world and the beginning of another. The empire is gone, but life continues. You must adapt to the new reality, learn to live under Ottoman rule, find your place in a city that is still your home but is also profoundly changed. The grief is overwhelming, but so is the need to survive. You return to your apartment, if it still stands, or you find shelter elsewhere. You look for work, you reconnect with family and friends who have also survived. Slowly, painfully, you begin to rebuild your life. In the aftermath of the fall, Constantinople is transformed. The Ottomans rename it Istanbul, and it becomes the capital of their empire. The Hagia Sophia is converted into a mosque, its mosaics covered with plaster, its cross replaced by a crescent. The great palace is abandoned, its halls left to decay. The city is repopulated with Muslims, Christians and Jews, a new cosmopolitan mix, but it is no longer the city it was. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, is gone. Yet the legacy of Constantinople endures. The city's influence can be seen in the art and architecture of the Orthodox world, in the churches of Russia and the Balkans, in the icons and liturgy that continue to be used to this day. The legal and administrative systems developed in Constantinople influenced the governance of countless states. The Greek language and classical learning preserved in the city's libraries and schools would later spark the Renaissance in Western Europe, as Byzantine scholars fled to Italy, carrying with them the knowledge of the ancient world. The intellectual legacy of Constantinople is profound and far-reaching. For 1,000 years, the city was the guardian of classical learning, the place where the works of ancient Greece and Rome were copied, studied, and preserved. While Western Europe descended into the Dark Ages, losing much of its connection to the classical past, Constantinople maintained that connection, keeping alive the works of Homer and Virgil, Plato and Aristotle, Euclid and Ptolemy. The scribes of Constantinople worked in monasteries and scriptoria, carefully copying manuscripts by hand, illuminating them with beautiful miniatures, binding them in leather and wood. When the city fell to the Ottomans, many of these scholars fled westward, seeking refuge in the courts and universities of Italy. They brought with them not just books but knowledge, the ability to read and understand ancient Greek, the expertise in philosophy and mathematics, the traditions of classical rhetoric and literature. Their arrival in Italy coincided with a growing interest in the classical past, and they became teachers and advisors to the humanists who would lead the Renaissance. Without the scholars of Constantinople, the Renaissance might never have happened, or at least not in the form that we know it. The artistic legacy is equally significant. Byzantine art, with its distinctive style, the flattened perspectives, the golden backgrounds, the elongated figures, influenced the development of art throughout Europe. The icons of Constantinople, with their powerful spiritual presence, became models for religious art in Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, and beyond. The mosaics of Ravenna, the frescoes of Mistras, the iconostasis of Russian Orthodox churches, all bear the unmistakable imprint of Byzantine aesthetics. The architectural legacy is visible in buildings throughout the former Byzantine world. The Hagia Sophia itself became a model for countless other churches. Its dome, seemingly floating on a ring of windows, inspired the architects of the great mosques of Istanbul, including the Süleymaniye and the Blue Mosque. The design principles developed in Constantinople, the use of pendentives to support domes, the arrangement of windows to maximize light, the integration of mosaics and frescoes into the architectural whole, spread throughout the Christian world and beyond. The legal legacy is perhaps less visible but no less important. The Corpus Juris Civilis, the great codification of Roman law commissioned by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, became the foundation of legal systems throughout Europe. It was studied in the universities of Bologna and Paris, and it influenced the development of civil law in countries from France to Germany to Spain. The Byzantine tradition of written law, of codification and systematic organization, stood in contrast to the oral and customary laws of much of medieval Europe, and it offered a model of legal rationality that would eventually triumph. The religious legacy is profound. The Orthodox Christian tradition, as it developed in Constantinople, spread to the Slavic peoples of Eastern Europe, the Russians, the Serbs, the Bulgarians. The missionaries sent from Constantinople, men like Cyril and Methodius, not only spread the faith but also created written languages for peoples who had none, translating the Bible and the liturgy into Slavonic. The Russian Orthodox Church in particular sees itself as the heir to Byzantine Christianity, and Moscow came to be known as the Third Rome, the successor to Constantinople as the center of the Orthodox world. Even the Ottoman Empire, which conquered Constantinople, was profoundly influenced by the city. The Ottomans did not destroy Byzantine institutions, they adapted them. The administrative systems, the tax structures, the legal codes, many of these were retained and modified rather than replaced. The Ottomans employed Greek administrators and scribes, recognizing their expertise. The Greek Orthodox Patriarchate was allowed to continue functioning, and the Patriarch became the civil as well as spiritual leader of the Greek community within the Ottoman Empire. In many ways, the Ottoman Empire was not just a successor to the Byzantine Empire, it was a continuation of it, transformed but not erased. To walk through Istanbul today is to walk through layers of history. The Great Walls still stand, battered but unbroken, a testament to the city's resilience. The Hagia Sophia, now a museum, still inspires awe with its massive dome and glittering mosaics, partially uncovered, revealing glimpses of the Byzantine past. The cisterns beneath the city, the aqueducts, the remnants of the hippodrome, all speak of a civilization that valued beauty, order, and grandeur. But the legacy is not just in stones and buildings, it is in the ideas, the traditions, the cultural patterns that Constantinople helped to shape. The notion of a universal empire, ruled by a single emperor who is both political and spiritual leader. The idea of a state church, intimately connected to the government. The tradition of intricate court ceremony and elaborate bureaucracy, the emphasis on education and literacy, on the preservation of knowledge. All of these have their roots in Constantinople, and all have influenced the development of European and world civilization. The story of Constantinople is a story of contrasts, of splendor and suffering, of faith and politics, of triumph and tragedy. It is a story of a city that stood at the crossroads of the world, a bridge between continents and cultures. A place where the sacred and the secular were inseparable. To have lived in Constantinople, whether as a silk worker or a soldier, a monk or a merchant, was to be part of something larger than oneself, to be connected to a tradition that stretched back to the earliest days of Christianity and the Roman Empire. And so, as we stand in the present and look back across the centuries, we can still hear the echoes of that lost world, the chanting in the Hagia Sophia, the roar of the crowd in the hippodrome, the clattering of looms, the prayers whispered before icons. Constantinople is gone, but its spirit, its legacy, remains. It is a reminder of what humanity can achieve, of the beauty and complexity of civilizations that rise and fall, and of the enduring power of memory and history. The memory of Constantinople has haunted the imagination of the world for centuries. Poets and writers have mourned its fall, have reimagined its glory, have used it as a symbol of lost greatness and vanished splendor. For the Greeks, it became a dream of restoration, a hope that one day the city would be reclaimed, that the empire would be reborn. This hope, this dream of the great idea, the megalai idea, sustained Greek culture through centuries of Ottoman rule, giving purpose and meaning to the struggle for independence. Even today, the memory of Byzantium remains powerful in Greek consciousness, a source of pride and identity, a link to a glorious past. For the Orthodox Christian world, Constantinople remains the spiritual center, even in absence. The Patriarch of Constantinople, though he no longer rules an empire, is still recognized as the ecumenical patriarch, first among equals in the Orthodox hierarchy. His residence in Istanbul, in the Fana Quarter, is modest compared to the great palace of old, but it carries immense symbolic weight. The liturgy that is celebrated there is the same liturgy that was celebrated in the Hagia Sophia 1,000 years ago, sung in the same ancient Greek, following the same rhythms and patterns. The icons that adorn the churches are painted in the same style, following the same iconographic traditions. In this sense, Byzantium never truly died. It lives on in the faith and practice of millions of Orthodox Christians around the world. For historians, Constantinople represents a crucial link between the ancient and medieval worlds, between East and West. It preserved the learning of Greece and Rome, transmitted it to the Islamic world and eventually back to Western Europe. It served as a buffer, protecting Europe from invasions from the East for centuries. It developed unique forms of government, art, and culture that influenced countless societies. To study Constantinople is to study the roots of modern civilization, to understand how the world we know came to be. The physical city, too, continues to reveal its secrets. Archaeologists and historians work constantly to uncover and preserve the remains of Byzantine Constantinople. Beneath the streets of modern Istanbul, they find cisterns and aqueducts, foundations of palaces and churches, fragments of mosaics and sculptures. Every discovery adds to our understanding of how the city worked, how its people lived, how they thought and believed and dreamed. The work is painstaking and never-ending, but it is also deeply rewarding, for each fragment recovered is a piece of the past restored to the present. And so our journey through the streets and centuries of Constantinople comes to an end. We have walked its marble halls, stood upon its mighty walls, listened to its prayers and its chariot races. We have felt the weight of its glory and the sorrow of its fall. This city, this impossible, magnificent city, was once the center of the world, and though it no longer exists as it was, its story continues to resonate, a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the relentless passage of time. We have seen the dawn breaking over the Golden Horn, watched the ships arrive with their cargoes from distant lands. We have walked the maze with its crowds and its merchants, felt the cool water from the fountains, smelled the incense in the Hagia Sophia. We have stood in the great palace and witnessed the emperor in his glory, descended into the hidden cisterns beneath the streets, joined the procession on a feast day. We have worked in the workshops and the docks, felt the hunger of a siege, heard the terrible sound of cannons breaking down the walls. We have experienced in some small measure what it meant to live in this city, to be part of its thousand-year story. Constantinople was a city of paradox, a place of immense wealth built on the labor of the poor, a Christian empire that often warred with other Christians, a repository of ancient learning that was also deeply superstitious, a cosmopolitan crossroads that was also deeply insular and protective of its identity. It was a city that saw itself as eternal, as the guardian of civilization, as the earthly reflection of the heavenly kingdom, and yet it fell, as all cities must fall, as all empires must end. But in its falling, it left a legacy that transcends its physical existence, a legacy of art and architecture, of law and learning, of faith and culture that continues to shape our world. Thank you for joining me tonight on this voyage through history. I hope you found in these words a moment of peace, a glimpse into a world long vanished but never truly forgotten. As you drift into sleep, may you dream of golden domes and ancient stones, of incense rising toward painted heavens, and of the soft lapping of waves against a city that once stood eternal. Until our next journey into the past, rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the echoes of distant ages. Good night.